And we're live. Awesome. All right. Perfect. Welcome everyone to episode 2 of the Spiritual View. Happy Family Day, if that happens to be happening in your neck of the woods. And I'm here with my lovely co-hosts, Sheila Shorten and Kim Wilkinson. So let's just maybe start while we're waiting for everyone to onboard. How's everyone doing on this holiday Monday? Kim, how are you doing?
I keep forgetting it's a holiday to start, and I'm good, but I tell you, I'm tired. I'm physically feeling a lot. I did work at the Witchery Market in Edmonton all weekend, so doing readings and in a lot of energy. So coming out of that, so it's nice to have a quieter day to just, I need to rebalance. It feels like reset.
Yeah, beautiful. I know I woke up this morning feeling very slow and very heavy and sluggish. And I'm not sure if it's the family dinner from last night and the cooking, or maybe if it's the energy. It could be both. How about you, Sheila? How are you feeling this morning?
I feel pretty good. I mean, I had some challenges with what we talked about, ascension things happening to me on the weekend. And so that was challenging and it was hard to sleep through that. But today I'm fine. So those symptoms seem to be gone. But that is definitely something that I experienced in the last few days for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. Hey.
Yeah.
And I think I've talked to a couple other people too. Like some people have said, oh, it's the solar flares or whatever that is. It doesn't really matter what it is, but I think a lot of people are just feeling a lot right now. So that's always interesting. Hey, I know my clients are too. So yeah. So, okay. So today's topic, we were thinking for all of you that are here, and if you're here, say hello and comment on the live so that, we know that you're here and we know that you can hear us, and we actually figured out technology, or more, I figured out technology. And if you watched episode 1, then what you would have seen is we talked a little bit about how this show came to fruition. And then Sheila did some channeling for us. And we had a little chat with Barbara Walters about what she thought was going on with the Spiritual View here, which was super cool. So we thought we would kind of continue with that theme today and talk about kind of all things around leaving this earth realm, what actually happens, and from our point of view, what happens when we pass and when we leave this body, and also just a few of our experiences in terms of mediumship and crossing over and those types of things. So I'd love to hear, maybe Sheila, we can start with you this morning about what your view is on what happens when we pass. Like, where do we go? What does that look like? What shifts and changes are there? What's your experience been with that?
So I can only talk about the people that I've channeled and what they've shown me and what they're telling me. And it seems to be a common consensus that where they're at is really incredible. They don't want you to feel bad for where they're at. In fact, they're very excited about where they're at. I can tell you this, that it's only happened to me once and I've avoided doing it since then, is I channeled someone on the day they passed, or maybe 24 hours later. And that experience was not good. That experience was, they were confused. They were wanting to come back. It was such a difficult time in that space. So I've always respected that ever since then, since I've got that feeling. And if I asked the person if they've passed just recently, and I like to wait at least 2 weeks, just based on what I felt. So I think there is a transitional time. I can't speak to that other than that one situation where it felt really wrong to connect to them. And I can tell you that when I do connect to them, when they've been gone a long, long time, it's really a lot more difficult to get their energy and their vibe, because they've really gone past this realm, it seems. When you do channel these people, really they want to come in and they don't want to talk about when they were dying and when it was difficult. They want to talk about when they had ice cream with you, or when they went to that beautiful park with you. That's kind of where they're at. And where we're like, oh my God, are you okay? Like, you were suffering and you were in this terrible place. And they're like, yeah, but I'm not. So let's not talk about it. It's not worth it. They also always remind me that they don't have anger, jealousy, guilt, any of those feelings. So if you want to tell them that you feel guilty about something, they really don't care. I mean, I say they don't care because they do have an interest in your life, but they don't want to dive into that because it makes no sense to them anymore. They've evolved to a place where they understand everything from a clear view. So if you love them and you connected to them in a loving way, that's all they know. That's their experience with you. Their experience is not that you didn't make it to their deathbed, not that you told them a nasty thing one time in your life. Their experience is that you love them, and they know that and they feel that.
Interesting. So the grudges don't carry over.
Doesn't seem to.
Okay. I think that would be, a piece of inner peace or solace for a lot of people to know that.
The way they bring it in too is interesting because they don't just say, I don't have any grudge against you. They talk about something that's very specific to you that lets you off the hook. So they're very intentional about how they present that information. Because if I was just to say, oh, they love you, certainly that can help the person. But if you tell them something very specific around that, then that really actually engages something. And there's some kind of energy that lodges in the person that's receiving the message where they can actually release that feeling of feeling guilt, or they're very intentional about helping you get rid of that. That is definitely, and if you want to go back to feeling guilty, you can, but they give you an opportunity to release that very, very easily.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And Kim, what's your experience been? Because I know you've had quite a few as well.
Yeah, for both personally and with clients as well. And for anybody who maybe doesn't know, my son Tristan did pass away in 2019 of overdose, and Sheila has channeled him a lot. I've had him come through a lot. And I agree with Sheila in that, again, just speaking from what my experiences are, I really believe there is no judgment from the other side. Like there's no negativity at all. It's just love and light and acceptance. And I do believe, yes, we definitely we leave the body. I have so much proof, undeniable truth through different channels from Sheila and others and my own experiences that they are still very much with us when they leave their physical body. With Tristan, especially, I've often said I could write a book on the stories, like the things where you can't make that stuff up, the undeniable signs and things that we experience. I also believe in my experience as well, that when our loved ones cross over, we do have to really recreate a whole new relationship with them. It's like starting over in how we communicate, because they do communicate differently, right? They're in that higher vibration. And we need to come up and more so be able to match their vibration to have these communications, because they can't come down to us, is my understanding and also my experience. Because I know if I am falling down into a lower vibration, I'm just completely closed off and not getting anything. But when I raise my vibration, it easily comes in. And just like meeting someone new in person on this planet for the first time, conversation might be awkward. It's like, what do we talk about? Or don't really relate. But the more you engage in conversation with them and continue to build this friendship, all of a sudden the communication flows really easily. You get to the point where you just get in tune with one another. Like I might say, Tracy, I just know you're feeling a little off today, right? Same thing with spirit relationships. We have to take the time and put effort in to recreating a new relationship so that we can have effective communication, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Awesome. So that brings up two questions that I'd love to hear from both of you. The first just being, because I feel like there'll be other people that are thinking this same question too, is what if, it's one thing if you're connecting with someone that has passed and you've had a very close relationship or a very loving relationship, or they were your grandmother or whatever that looks like. But what about when it's been the opposite? What if you had, for example, a parent pass and your relationship was terrible or even non-existent? Or what if it's a sibling where you were always like this? Or what does that look like then? Is it different, or is it actually still the same in terms of connecting with them? Or are there times when you might want to connect with that loved one and they simply just won't show up.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful connection, just like it would be if they had a loving situation, because often the person that has passed has evolved. And if they look at the situation, they can see the situation, what we call here on earth, from our third eye, from our truth. They can see it clearly. So when they come forward with it, they come forward with the truth. I apologize for not acknowledging you. I apologize for not being kind to you. Those are the messages that they bring when those situations happen. But it is equally as loving as any other channel, because now they're from a loving place and they don't want to create more drama, more difficulty. They want to really present to you that they understand that they were not kind, or they were not in a place of being good to you. So yeah, it's not difficult. Those situations you think would be, maybe confliction or difficult. I've had situations where I brought a person's mother in where they didn't like their mother, and they were mad that their mother came in. They didn't want to talk to their mother. But the mother came in a very loving way that offered them an opportunity to let go of that real hatred and that frustration for that person. So I think they come in for a reason, not to create any harm at all.
Interesting. And what a beautiful opportunity for healing that presents to the person that's still here, Earth side. Right? Kim, do you have
we do have to listen or to not listen, though, because I've had situations where the mother has come in and said something and gave them a chance to really heal from it, but they chose not to. The anger and the frustration is deep within that person. So we still, as humans, have a choice whether or not we're going to let go of that.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side definitely comes in and gives you an opportunity to do that. And one of the things that I've learned is that the karma that someone has leaves on this planet. So let's say I walk around and I'm miserable to everyone I come across. That is karma that I've left behind. If you don't release that, then on the other side, I'm still stuck in that, which is really fascinating to me. So any karma that I leave behind, it is the responsibility of the person that I've landed that karma on to help me release it, which seems a little bit odd. It seems a little bit backwards, but that has been my real observation of it. If we want to hold on to our story, and then they're left with in the space that they've left that karma with you.
Can you just define karma just so that everybody understands what you mean by that? Because I know there's many definitions of it.
Yeah. So in this way, I understand that karma can be used in lots of different ways. In this way, it's the energy that I left behind. So the energy that I presented on this planet. So okay. Good or bad, we define it as good or bad as humans. But if I leave something behind that you can't let go of, I'm hoping this makes sense. If I leave anger behind and I treated you with anger, then when I pass, I no longer have the ability to release that. I'm dependent on you to release that.
Gotcha.
I hope I'm making sense. It can get convoluted.
Yeah, it does. Well, it does make sense with that example, which is why I was like, because from a SRT perspective, actually, just a total side note, when they talk about karma, they talk about it in terms of balance, right? That we're wanting to balance out the relationship and kind of balance out the scales. Whereas I know a lot of people, when they think about karma, it's like the boomerang effect, right? It's like what you put out is what you get back. So I just wanted to clarify that because I think that that's super helpful for everybody that's watching.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be what you put out as well. It is part of that. What you put out is what you get back, because then you remain stuck in another dimension with the idea that you've left something behind that is not good.
So if you're the soul that left behind the anger and then crossed over, does that mean that you can't actually fully cross then, that you're stuck in this dimension and can't go all the way because of that?
I don't think it means you can't. I don't know about this crossing because I haven't experienced that. All I can say is that they've expressed to me that they are not able to evolve to the next state, whatever that is. If it's crossing over, maybe that's it. but they can't evolve as a spiritual being until that's released.
So what if it's not released?
Well, it could take generations. It could take, and time is not relevant, as we know. So it could just take time, right?
Right. Hence the generational healing and the ancestors. Okay, that makes so much sense. Kim, what are your thoughts on this? Because I know this must be super fascinating for you, considering that you have a son that's passed, and so that's very close to you.
Yeah, and absolutely. And that's the exact perfect example that Sheila's talking about. And we actually, I don't know if the podcast on that episode is out yet or if it's coming out, but there is an episode on our spiritual engagement podcast called, I think we called it Releasing Karma. And we used the example of my son, Tristan, and Sheila, I don't know if you remember, because we do so many channels, but basically it was by me doing all of the work I've done and bringing myself to the place where I am, it actually allowed him to move to another level. We talk about that on the podcast. So that was really interesting because I didn't even have that awareness or understanding or think of that before, but it made a lot of sense. And so there is this ascension for us in our human form on the planet, but it appears there's also these levels of ascension on the other side as well, is my understanding. And that was really cool. And I really felt that. And the channel, if I remember right, like Tristan actually came in and said, I'm in a new place now. And still very much there to connect, but I did feel a huge shift as well.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's it really is. It's beautiful.
And did you find that you had to work through some of those pieces where like there were some strong emotions, with him that you had to kind of process and work through at the beginning?
Yeah, and that's it's been an interesting journey and changed my whole view on death and a lot of things in life, right? I mean, I was doing some of this work and had some of this understanding and awareness before he passed away. The last few years he was alive, there was a lot of struggle. There was a lot of suffering. And there was a lot of times, and even today, I will often say it is and was more difficult to watch him go through some of this suffering than to actually hear of his death. Like I remember very clearly, and I actually intuitively knew that we were going to lose him. I didn't know when. I prayed it didn't, but I just knew. And when I got the call and found out the news, it was so bizarre because of course it was this heart shattering. I remember even saying to my husband, it hurts so bad in my heart. But at the same time, there was this like, thank God the suffering was done. Like, thank God the suffering was done because there was a lot of physical and emotional and just all sorts of suffering. And, at that point is, I think when I really realized that sometimes our grieving, and not everybody is going to understand this, but to be human is to suffer. I can't remember where that quote comes from, but there's so much truth in it. To be human is to suffer. And as we're learning the other side, there's no suffering. There's no suffering. There's no unpleasantness. So, if you think about it from a different perspective, it's like, wow, good for you. Like no suffering, you get to go to this beautiful place, but yet we want our loved ones to stay here and suffer with us. And I mean, it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. Right. And one of the things for me, and this even came through from my guides through Sheila in one of the sessions we did, is they said the reason I am where I am, which I tell people I'm living my best life right now, that I've been the best place I've ever been. But the reason is because of my acceptance of my circumstances. And when I went in to heal the loss of Tristan, I realized I had all this other stuff to heal. And I don't think we ever really heal from everything, but I feel like I healed from everything in a sense. And it completely changed everything. Who I am brought me into the work I do. And like I said, this new connection with spirit. And I really think that is the key, the acceptance piece. And that is very, very difficult for a lot of us to do. So And now I see life, I see death so differently. And it maybe sounds like I'm not empathetic or there isn't any sadness. I mean, there is sadness when people leave this earth, but I see it as such a beautiful thing now because they're going to somewhere beautiful and peaceful and expansive and magical.
Yeah.
So there's some excitement and joy in it.
And I think too, it's important, and maybe you can touch on this too, Kim, to kind of look at the word acceptance and what that means. Because I feel like there's almost this blanket idea, in the world that when we accept something, it's like this term of it is what it is, which then renders us actually powerless, right? It's like I'm accepting whatever shitty because there's nothing I can do about it. And I feel like that's not exactly what you mean.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's two parts to that, I guess. And for me, and everybody has different beliefs, but I really believe that we come into this life choosing our experiences. I also think we have free will, but I really strongly believe that Tristan and I made an agreement to come into this life and have that experience. And there was significant purpose in that experience. It was a horrible, shitty experience, but you can choose to heal, you can choose to suffer. You can say things happen to me or things happen for me. And I chose to heal. I chose to see that things happen for me. And like I said, had I not gone through all that, I wouldn't be who I am today. I wouldn't do the work I do today. I wouldn't have the experiences I have today. So I have a lot of gratitude for it. And then the other side, the more, I guess, scientific side of the acceptance piece is, it's easy to say that it is what it is. And this understanding, I think, came more from my trauma coaching or trauma recovery training with Dr. Gabor Mate. And I started to understand that when we can understand the why behind something, it does help us to move into a place of acceptance. And understanding why doesn't mean we're going to like it or agree with it, but we can understand why it happened. So for example, maybe it's, why was this person such a jerk in this relationship, or why did he or she do this? When we can kind of look back and go, okay, well, maybe it's because that's what they were taught. That's the only thing they know. Or maybe they had their own traumas and unresolved emotional things they were going through. And this was an action out of defense and not necessarily targeted towards me. Again, doesn't mean I'm going to like it or agree with it, but when I can understand it, I can go, okay. And then I really have two options. I can stay in that energy and stay stuck, or I can accept it. And the truth is, we can't change anything that's happened in the past. Nobody can, nobody ever will. So we either stay stuck in it, or we choose to accept and move forward and hopefully take away some sort of lesson or opportunity. I think sometimes those opportunities, we've all been there on that hamster wheel, whether it's in relationships or jobs, where you have those same experiences and you feel like, why does this keep happening to me, right? How about why does this keep happening for me? Because it's my opportunity to break this cycle and to be able to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And that's my perspective on that.
Absolutely. And that, that brings us kind of full circle to a lot of the work that I do with past lives and Akashic records and with soul plans, right? Which is, looking at, this is what I believe to be true, is before we even incarnate, it's almost like we sit down at the table, so to speak, with our soul family, and we get to say, okay, I'm going to incarnate in this lifetime so that, and it could be, I can, ignite generational healing, right? Like ancestral healing. It could be that I want to learn about, there's this amazing book. I don't know if the other of you have read it, but it's called Soul Plan. And it's about this, the author, and his name is escaping me right now. Maybe we can put it in the notes later, but he's a psychologist and he puts all of his patients under a sort of hypnosis, and they start, that's wrong. He has patients, and then he works with 3 mediums and they bring through the soul contracts. I'm mixing up books. This is how many I've read. But they start to talk about the reasons for the lessons that we are learning in this lifetime. And it is an amazing, mind-blowing perspective shift to read about these things, because things are not always what they seem or what they think, right? And we look at why, a mom might have, let's say, a special needs child and what the agreement was between them, right? And that there's gifts in it for each of them, and that every experience that we have, no matter how traumatic and how terrible it is, that we've agreed to it on some level because there's gifts for each of us. right? And when we fall into those cycles, like you're talking about, Kim, those loops, it's then that we didn't get the lesson, right? So it comes at us from a different way, right? So that we can have that opportunity to grab it again. And if we miss it, it's going to come again in a different way, right? And sometimes we get ourselves stuck in, almost the victim of it in a way, for lack of a better word, thinking, why is this always happening to me? And why can't I get out of this? And it's that perspective shift that is required, or maybe it's a different action or whatever that is, right? But it's all divinely guided. And when you get to that point where you can perhaps understand or even accept on some level that I've chosen this, right? That actually becomes very empowering in a way, from my perspective. Yeah. Sheila, have you come across any of that in your work as well?
Yeah, so I don't really understand Akashic records, but for some reason they're coming up in my channeling lately. They came up in Kim's the other day, they've come up in another person's. And what that's really showing me, and I don't have any training on this, but it's showing me that there is some kind of record that we come here to the planet with, and it is how we are meant to experience the world. So when we talk about free will, that word is a little bit challenging for me now, because I have had experiences where I've had messages very clearly given to me, like kind of in the middle of the night, like, this is going to happen to you. You are not going to get that job. These kind of messages have come up really strong. And so I now start to think there must be some kind of agreement that we've made prior to coming here. So that's our free will there. And when we come to the planet, if we're not acting out that story, we'll be redirected back to it. Or we will not get the boyfriend that we think we're supposed to get. We will not get the job we think we're supposed to get, because those are not part of our experience that we're supposed to have. And I can't deny that anymore, just because of situations and channels that I've had that have come through. So free will is kind of have a new, different meaning for me lately. And I'm sure that our listeners could probably attest to that. They've really wanted something really bad, and then it didn't appear for them. And really what they might have meditated on, they might have tried to manifest it in, it doesn't come no matter how much you try. And then they realize after the fact, that's why that didn't happen. That wasn't the person I was supposed to be. That wasn't the job I was supposed to get. So that's, I don't know, discussing that free will might be just a new way for me, I guess, just based on the experience of channeling.
Yeah. And I actually have had that same kind of like, oh, I'm not sure about the idea of free will as well, because in my experience with Akashic records is there are certain things, not everything, but certain things that we agree to. So for example, I might agree to come into this lifetime and, do some generational work, or I might agree to come into this lifetime and maybe there's a contract with my mom that's shows her that, there's a different way, for example, than what she's done in the past, or whatever that is, right? But when we get here, even though the soul knows the agreements, the human doesn't remember them, right? So because of that, as a human, we have this internal kind of unconscious motivation to go in a certain direction, right? But even though we have that drive or that pull or that desire, the how is, to me, is kind of the free will part. Right? Because just because I have this soul directive doesn't mean that I'm going to choose it when I get here. And then that's where we see ourselves repeating lifetime after lifetime of this similar experience, like the similar programming, because when we got down here, we just, for whatever reason, decided that's too hard, or I don't want to do that, because the human experience of it is very different than when we choose it on a spiritual level, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm kind of chuckling because, well, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Susan Lamish, who says she's listening while cleaning her house. So thank you, Susan, for joining us. And as you were talking about that, Tracy, this message was coming through for me from Spirit about this whole thing on free will. And what I was hearing and seeing was, it was like the Monopoly game, like pass, go and collect $200 and just get out of jail free card, where it's like you have to complete some of your tasks, and then you get that little bit of free will, and then, complete some more. So I've never thought of it or heard it that way before, but I thought I would share that because that's what's coming through. So kind of funny, yeah, get out of jail free or pass, go and collect your little bit of free will.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. And, and I've said this a lot lately in the last few years about, again, coming back to things happen for me. When I look back at everything that I viewed as crappy, whether it was, a job loss or a relationship ending, everything, I can see now the significance in it always, right? And I mean, every single one of us can relate to this, because I'm sure every single person has been in a relationship at some point where they were like, I can't imagine living without this person. And when the relationship ends, especially if you didn't end it, it's like, oh my God, how am I going to live, right? And fast forward to today, you might think, I don't even remember that person's name, or what was I thinking, right? And so we can see now, okay, it was very significant that it ended. Or even times where, maybe you get laid off. And it feels like it's so easy to fall into that victimhood. But then, maybe it's not till 2 or 3 months later, but then you get this other job that pays better and you get to work from home. And it's like, had I not got laid off, I wouldn't have gotten that job. And I mean, there's so many examples. And I think a lot of times we do create that too, right? I mean, if you're going to work every day, I hate my job, I don't want to get up, I don't want to go to work. That's what you're asking for. The universe might just give that to you too, right?
Yeah.
But, when I can see that in every situation in my life so far. So now I'm really a lot more comfortable and trusting in this concept of, okay, things are happening for me. So if what I'm wanting isn't happening, there's a purpose, whether it's not the right time or there's something better. And I think when we can let go of the resistance of that, things show up quicker. But when we bring in that resistance and we try to control it and make it happen, it's like we push everything further away.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really interesting that you brought up that Susan was listening to this podcast, to this session, because she's one of the people that it was a funny situation that happened with her. And it's a simple situation. I'd lost my phone in St. Albert in a grocery store. And I'd driven back to Edmonton and realized that, and had to drive back to St. Albert to the grocery store to try to find it. And I'm thinking, okay, no problem. I'm going to find it. It's not a problem. Everything always works out for me. I'm going to find my phone. So I get to the grocery store and I don't know how I'm going to find my phone, but I turn around in the grocery store and I see Susan. She's there. And I'm like, Susan, I've lost my phone here. And she said, well, here, use my phone to call it and see if you can find it. So that's what we did to find my phone. So it's funny that she shows up on this session, because that's an example of how I believe I was guided that day and how she was perfectly placed there for me. I mean, nothing in my life I'd still be okay if I didn't ever find my phone, but it was wonderful to have such an easy situation and have it fall into place. And I think of that situation often, of how much I must be guided, how they placed Susan right there at the right time for me so that I could easily find my phone. So there's all kinds of situations like that we have in our life that show us that we probably are guided, that there are probably lots of opportunities. I stayed in the flow of it so that the guides could assist me and could help me. Susan was an easy person to have, because she's obviously in the flow and easily respond to the situation with kindness. So yeah, it's interesting that you said she was listening today, because I often think of that experience as a guided experience.
Well, had she not been here today, you probably wouldn't have shared that story. So another divinely guided experience for all of us today.
Absolutely. And that's, that's actually a really good segue into the next place that I want to go, is we've talked about what happens when you cross, like when you're on the other side, but let's kind of rewind and talk about what happens before you actually, pass away, right? What does that look like? Whether that's, in the last few moments or in the last few months. Do maybe share a personal experience of what you've noticed, or a specific situation, or how that shows up for you in your work, right? Because there's many, I don't know about you, but there's, I don't call myself a medium per se. Like, I know some people use that and that's all that they do, right? And that's not a title that I necessarily claim, but what I notice for me is that usually it's my clients, sometimes it's not, but it shows up when it's needed or necessary, right? So it's not something that is always turned on for me, but when there needs to be a message for someone that's lying on my table, or I've even gone to certain healing things and all of a sudden felt presence of specific people that have passed, right? And again, it's that aspect of being divinely guided. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that. Sheila, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's funny because I was at a funeral yesterday, which is interesting. And one of the people that I was talking to, Larry, he was telling me about his uncle passing. And he said when his uncle passed, he was looking into his eyes prior to, and then there was no life. Like, it was within seconds. There was life and then there was no life. And he said it impacted him so strongly on this experience, that he was shown the difference between being here in your physical form and not. And what that did to me was it really showed me that there is a significant change. When we're in physical form, we have the opportunity to move, to walk, to breathe, to all these things. I believe there is a spirit, and not everyone believes that, but I believe there's a spirit that carries on, but it doesn't carry on in the physical form. And when he's describing that, I'm thinking, well, yeah, it's okay. That person is just now spiritual. But it's hard to explain that to most people, that this body is no longer necessary. And I guess all I want to say to that is it's an acceptance that I have, that we do not need this body at some point in time. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. I have no reason or understanding of why, but there is a chance between that second of life and that second of death where something changes. Yeah. And I'm able to talk to them from that other side, but none of them have ever told me why it's necessary to have a body and not have a body. Mm-hmm. I've never been a message. So that might be something that I could ask. I don't know if, Kim, you have any experience on that, why we have a body and not?
That I don't. I mean, if I meditated on it, maybe I get an answer, but I do have two quick stories that I could share. One about just before and going into passing, and then one after that was really interesting. So the first, and this story for me was just such validation that there is so much energy and support in spirit. And in early January this year, my grandmother passed away. She was 95. And I was able to spend the last few days that she was alive here on the earth with her. And it was so interesting. I knew just through conversation, she couldn't talk a lot, but the conversation we had made it very clear she was very much in her right mind, aware, able to understand everything, just difficulty speaking and getting weak. The body was slowly shutting down. But as I laid or sat beside her bed, she was very weak, but at times she would open her eyes so wide, like something would catch her attention, and she would start to scan the room, and you could just see this emotion in her eyes. And I leaned in and I said, "Grandma, do you see the angels?" And she nodded. But I just get goosebumps thinking about this. And I said, "Are they beautiful?" And she said, "Yeah." And she'd follow them and their eyes would close again. And a few minutes later, they'd open up. And this went on. And then at one point I said, "Grandma, do you want to go with the angels?" And it took her a bit to get it out, but she said, "Not yet." And I said, "Okay, well, whenever you're ready." But it was just so, it was such a beautiful experience for one, and just so comforting and validating to know that we are so graded when it comes time to cross over, to transition, to leave our body and go into spirit world. There is so much support. She said Grandpa was there and a few others. So that was really beautiful. And I mean, I believed before, but I believe even more now. The other short story I'll share is a situation where I had a client, and this is probably, almost 7 or 8 years ago. And she's given me permission to share this story numerous times. Friend of mine now, Kat Marco. And she came for a Reiki session, and we had never met before. So it was the first time, and she came for Reiki, and I did a lot of theta healing back then as well. And during the session, I just got a sense, okay, we need to sit on the floor and go into some theta healing, because there's something that needs to happen or come in. Anyway, long story short, what happened is we sat facing each other, her hands on top of mine. And what had happened for her is her boyfriend had died of an overdose. And there was this need for completion for her because they never got to say goodbye. It was, obviously a tragic, unplanned event. And he wanted to come through so that she could have closure. And I could actually feel his energy come in through my body, and through sort of a guided meditation and journey, they were able to, it was so beautiful. And she describes it in her own way, but they were able to find completion to that relationship. And it was really powerful for her. And I mean, she does amazing work now, and she's such a beautiful person and helping so many people. But that was really powerful for me as well. And I mean, since then there's been similar situations for clients, but it's definitely very real. It's definitely very real. It's just different.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you to your clients for your permission to sharing that too. And what I love about what you just said is they're all different, right? Like, I think that it's important. And that was one of the things I wanted to make sure that we touched on today too, is the understanding that the way that people experience it is different, that it doesn't have to be just one way, right? And so, so for example, my most recent experience is actually this past summer. My husband's mom passed away. In the entirety of it, it was quite quick from when she started with a fall, just that had happened during a family dinner. She was hospitalized right away. My husband went down to see her, where she was completely conscious in the hospital in Calgary. And then the following week, we traveled to Medicine Hat, where they're from, to see her, and with myself and my kids, because they hadn't seen their Baba for a while because of the I don't know if I should say this word on YouTube, we might get censored, but because of the vid, and then being worried about getting sick and us trying to keep them safe and all those things. But so when we got there, she had degraded quite a bit and was not conscious anymore. And her breathing was very labored. So there was, a lot of gasping, and it looked to us as though she was in a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort. And the family, like her husband and her children, were really struggling with just, why is she hanging on and continuing to suffer, right? And they were having conversations with her saying, you can let go, everything's taken care of, because it was very difficult to watch her suffer, right? And, at one point, one of the family members had said to me, I don't understand why she's hanging on. Like, what's this about? And I was like, okay, so I started to tap in a little bit and had a conversation with her, actually telepathically. And there was two major things. And the first thing was that she needed to know that her husband was going to be taken care of. And yes, they had made some plans for him in terms of, they were going to get him a meal service for a couple of times a week, and they were going to get him a house cleaner and some of these things to help him to function in ways that she had helped him before, right? Like to kind of take some of the work off and what have you. And so I had pulled my husband aside, and my husband doesn't play in this world too much. So I was like, okay, I know you might think this sounds a little bizarre, but I had a conversation with her, and this is what she said, right? I said, I think you need to go and talk to her husband and just, make sure that he understands that, because he lives so far away, he's not going to be alone all the time. And it was more that aspect of that she really wanted him to be surrounded by family, right? She didn't want him to be kind of in Medicine Hat and on his own, and us in Edmonton and other family in Calgary and other family in Ontario and this type of thing, right? So they had this conversation, and I was like, okay. And then we continued to wait, and she was still here. And I was like, okay, well, there's got to be something else then. There's got to be something else. I tapped back in and I had this conversation with her, and I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And I said, we need to leave. We need to leave. As long as, and she had had a family member there around the clock, 24/7 for the last 2 weeks. And I said, we have to go. We have to go. And so it took a while to convince, and the best that I could convince was, let's go have a shower, at the hotel. Let's go grab something to eat. Let's just take a break, and we'll come back in a couple hours. So we were the first to come back, myself and my husband and my kids, before her husband, and we got back there, and she had continued to degrade, but she was still there. And we sat with her, and my husband said goodbye, and we all said goodbye. And as that was happening, to my surprise and delight, my ancestors came in and they did this beautiful indigenous ceremony for her. And they did this drumming, and I saw my ancestors help her to cross over. And we literally left the room and walked out of the hospital. And by the time that we had walked out, she had essentially passed, maybe a little bit longer. So when her husband came back, she was already gone. And it was the most, even as I'm telling you, like so many goosebumps, like it was the most beautiful experience that I have ever had. And yet at the same time, right, when we look at death, it's one of the most tragic, right? But it was amazing. It was amazing.
That's
I don't even know
beautiful.
what to say after that. Yeah, just makes me want to cry a little bit.
Wow.
Yeah.
If I can share one more thing, and this is just another, and my view, I'll say, because it's just something that's coming through from spirit as a messaging. I actually think it is coming from my grandmother, the last little bit. And it's this, I guess, lesson or validation around, like we've talked about earlier, when people pass and maybe there's this, unresolved conflicts and things like that. And from what I'm starting to understand through the messaging that's coming through is that those in spirit who have crossed recognize that there is unresolved stuff still here on earth within us or other family members. And as Sheila mentioned, they come through to try to help those left behind to release that. However, from what I'm understanding is there's this knowing there with those that have crossed over that, if they don't find that, they will get it as soon as they cross. They will remember, right? Because like you said, we make these agreements. We don't remember when we're on earth and in this human form, but, and I think that's why there's no judgment or no worry or any of that heavy or emotional stuff on the other side, because they know that we'll completely get it as soon as we cross over, which is really kind of cool.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
I had a woman come through one time, which is quite interesting to me. I don't often know the person that's getting the channel, and I don't obviously know who the person that passed away. And the woman came through and was really clear on her messaging saying, I got it wrong. I got it wrong on this lifetime. And it turns out that this woman was a workaholic and worked all the time and didn't pay attention to the signs of her health. Those kinds of things were coming up in the channel. So they also get an opportunity to see how they got it wrong when they came to the planet. Doesn't mean that they're tortured by it anymore, but they're just acknowledging to you that this is, they do know that they didn't experience the world the way they were. Probably the Akashic records or however it was designed to come through, they knew better and they did it their way, but perhaps that they got it wrong. So that was interesting too. We do, like, maybe that goes to that free will where we do have a bit of free will and we can keep pushing against if we want. But there's consequences to that. Her life here wasn't long. Working all the time, as we know, is stress, and stress causes disease. And that was what ended her life. So yeah, so just those things are beautiful reminders to us. That person didn't come in to remind the other person of that because they wanted them to feel bad for them, or there was none of that. They just wanted to bring the message forward as like, you got a chance to get it right.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Just share, I'm keeping an eye on the comments on the YouTube live here, and Susan shares again, and I didn't know this, so thank you, Susan. I'm going to share it. She says, so I don't know if any of you know this, but I did have a near-death experience in 1992 after having my daughter. I developed an infection and was given 24 hours to live or die. At one point, I was hovering over my body on the hospital bed. Everything was slow for me, but frantic in the room. I remember having a choice, and I chose to return to my body. It was a month recovery.
I didn't know that, Susan. Wow.
Thank you for sharing that, Susan.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Full body chills as you're reading that to me, Kim. I'm just like, woo, spirit shiver.
That's wild. What an experience. Thank you for sharing that, Susan.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we love to hear those sorts of things. I mean, not only do we have our YouTube channel here, we have the Facebook page where we can, carry on these types of conversations. You can reach out to us.
Yeah.
And anybody wants to be a guest,
Yep.
contact Tracy.
Totally. And that's, I love that story though, because that's a beautiful testament to kind of to the aspect that we're talking about around free will, right? Where she said, I had a choice. Right? I could be complete here, or I could come back and continue. Right. Which I love. And, the one other thing that I thought would be really cool if we just change gears a little bit right now to talk about as we kind of wrap this episode up is I know that there's going to be other people that are, healers and light workers and things like that. And one of the questions that I often come across, or one of the comments I often hear, and I would love to hear feedback from both of you about this, is I hear people talking about, it's almost like there's this, to me, it's a misconception. That's how I see it, but it's a misconception about mediumship in general. And I've had a lot of clients come to me and say, I feel like I have this gift, or that I can communicate, but I don't want it to take me out. I don't want to suffer. And it's like there's this misconception of hearing stories of people who have the gift of mediumship and who identify as mediums and having the experience of it making them sick or taking them out, or being something that is just far too much to manage, if you will. And for me, that's not a belief that I subscribe to. Like, I'm very rooted and unwavering in my energy and in my boundaries and in what I allow and when I allow it, and those types of things. And I feel like that's an aspect that is very helpful, but I'd love to hear what your thoughts and your experiences are on that, because I know you both are also very amazingly gifted women. So Sheila.
Yeah, that's an interesting one for me, because when I do a session, people always go, oh my gosh, did that take a lot out of you? And I'm like, no, that brought a lot to me. The experience is usually quite enlightening. The wisdom that they bring forward for you, the client, is the same wisdom that I'm receiving. I, for some reason, don't always get the benefit of remembering the channels. For some reason, I don't think I have the capacity, or I'm in a different state of mind that my conscious mind doesn't remember it. If you talk to me about it, I will remember it. But it leaves me very quickly. But no, my experience is a client leaves and I'm like full of energy, full of joy, full of understanding and wisdom. I keep growing and evolving with each and every client I see. Every single person is my teacher when they land at my home or in a session with me. I learned so much, and I'm so grateful for that. And I don't think I could ever say that would be draining.
Yeah.
It is very much a gift, I think. And a gift always comes in the form of healing and health and happiness.
Yeah, I love that. And so from your point of view, then, what do you think might be potentially happening that could cause that drain or cause that experience?
For me, I can only speak for me. Anytime I have any kind of difficulty, if I'm teaching a yoga class or if I'm doing a channeling or anything, it's when I have resistance to what's happening. So I know that when I teach like students sometimes and they're not listening, like young students, like 13, 14-year-olds, and I'm trying to teach them yoga and they're not listening, I can leave there very drained. It's not because of them. It's because I'm resisting who they are and what they're presenting. So that's my experience. Anytime I resist, I will experience a difficulty.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. And Kim, what's your point of view?
For me, it all comes down to beliefs and intentions. And that you're going to experience wherever your beliefs are, right? And I can be an example of the shift from one to the other. So way back when I first started doing my Reiki trainings, that sort of thing, because of what was being taught to me, or how I perceived it, I guess, was that, oh my gosh, you start doing this work, you're going to feel everybody's stuff, you're going to have to ground yourself and clear every day, and on and on and on, right? So that was my experience for quite some time. And then I don't know what it was. Honestly, I think it was a Sad Guru video that I watched one day. I don't remember what it was, but I had this, shift where I realized, okay, if I change my belief, I'm going to change my experience. And that's exactly what I did. And my belief became that I can be aware of other people's stuff, what's going on, the emotions, but I don't have to carry it. And ever since I made that shift in that belief, I don't ground myself anymore before someone comes. I just try to have myself intentionally grounded all the time. I don't feel like I have to do this big clearing after. I can still be very aware of what they're going through and what they're feeling, but that's theirs. It's not mine. So I think by setting that intention and having that belief, you automatically put that boundary there. Having said that, I think it's important sometimes to remind ourselves to keep that intention and bring that belief forward as we go. There's times when I have forgotten. There was a time when I went for a massage earlier this year with the intention of kind of releasing any lingering 3D stuff and whatnot. And it was the worst massage ever. And partway through, I heard spirit all around the room saying, "You asked for this." And I went, "Yeah, I did." And I forgot to ask for it with, what's the word I would say?
Ease and grace.
Ease and grace. Yes, with ease and grace, right? And then when I started really channeling, I believe what was happening was, I believe Tristan was bringing just random souls who had passed to me. Souls who were wanting to connect with their loved ones here to bring messages. But I guess I was just so open that they were coming to me. And it was coming in so clear and vivid and detailed, but I didn't know who their loved ones were. So I was like, this is great. I've got names, I've got tattoo markings, like all these physical things. But they started to get, I don't want to say dark, but the people that were coming it seemed they were all people who had died by like suicide or overdose, who had a lot of trauma. And I was so open that they were coming in, and it was like I was them in their human form experiencing what they went through. So they were really showing me in detail. And it started to get really, like I said, dark, not in a bad way, but just dark in how they lived. Mm-hmm. And it really felt so horrible that I kind of blocked it out for a bit. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, well, I wasn't really bringing intention into it. I was just like, okay, come on in. So I had to shift and bring the beliefs and the intention into that. And then it's started to come back again, because for a while I didn't connect with those type of spirit energies. It was just guides and angels. And now I've set the intention and brought my beliefs into reconnecting with those energies again. So for me, so much of it is intention and beliefs.
Yeah, I absolutely would agree with that, Kim. Like, I feel like in the work that I've done with the Akashic Records and a lot of other stuff, what I've kind of learned is it absolutely is what we subscribe to, right? Just like we're asking you all to subscribe to our channel, right? It's what we could say resonance field, right? Or what energetic grid are you choosing to subscribe to, right? And I feel like there was, especially, if we go back into the past, there was a long period of time where there was almost like this, let's call it a collective contract, if you will, running, that if you were doing this type of work, not even just necessarily mediumship, but healers and light workers and shamans and medicine women and all of those things, that it was like there was this program of self-sacrifice that was attached to it. And it was like, okay, if you're going to do this work, you can do this work, but it came with this idea that it had to be at the expense of self. And it's something that's kind of played through lifetime after lifetime, right? Whether it was because we were persecuted and burned at the stake, or whether it was a physical, a dis-ease, we could say, or a death, or whatever that is. And I feel like right now, collectively, we're moving into this newer paradigm, or this new contract, we could say as well, where we are no longer, attached to those ties that bind. And now we can move forward and do it from a place of absolute sovereignty, and that sovereignty in our physical bodies and in our minds. And no longer do we have to sacrifice self in order to be that healer, or be that light worker, or be that channel, or whatever it is. That's just what I believe to be true. But I really don't feel as though it's, the suffering is optional at this point in the game.
And it's interesting. I think it's interesting because the channel that we did for Kim the other day, and I would be interesting now to you, if you were able to observe those experiences of those people, like talking about their dark lifestyle from the channel that we did, the other day, it's acceptance of everything. So if we're to see that as dark and as that is not acceptable, and that's not a good way of living, then we'll experience it that way. And as we evolve as humans, I'm certainly not there, but as we evolve as human, I think our suffering becomes less when we present less judgment on others and their experience.
Yeah.
And we call it dark, or we call it whatever the names or terms we define it as. So as we evolve, I think there has to be some kind of understanding that we're going to come to this wisdom that all of it is okay. All of it.
Yeah.
Purpose in all of it, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. To me, there's nothing more powerful than the space of neutrality.
Right.
Yeah.
And the more we move into the space of neutrality, the less suffering we have. Right. So when we talk, we suffer from doing this work only when we put judgment on it. I think that's when we suffer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful full circle wrap, Sheila.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Is there, Kim, just before we kind of wrap it up, is there any final comments or anything that we want to look at all?
No, just a few people just saying hello. Barbara Johnson, Chandra. Oh gosh, Chandra, I hope I say this right. Bourbonnais. Also just saying hello and that they're here watching. So
awesome. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you to everyone that joined us live, as well as everyone that is going to catch this on the replay, which we will drop on our Facebook page. And if there's any topic that you would like to see us have a conversation on, please feel free. You can either message us, or you can, there's also, you can drop it on a post and let us know too. We've got a couple posts up there. And if you would love to come and have a conversation with us, then you can shoot me a direct message as well. And we can make that happen, because all views are welcome on the Spiritual View, right? Awesome. Okay. So any final words, Kim or Sheila, before I end?
just have a great day, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah. Fabulous.
Yeah. We're filming this on Family Day. So if you're enjoying your family, hopefully you're enjoying today and every day.
Yes, absolutely. We're sending you all so much love, and we'll see you next week on Monday at 9:30 Mountain Standard Time. Bye.
Subscribe.
Don't forget to subscribe.
And invite your friends.
Yep. Bye.
Hi, everyone.